This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
Thank you all very much. We can get started. I think we're just after 1 o'clock. You're very welcome. My name is Alex White, Director General here at the Institute, and I'm really delighted to welcome everybody here to this event at the IIA this afternoon, this beautiful afternoon. The event entitled Digital Fairness and the Digital Economy, Can Europe Strike the Right Balance? And today's event is organised by the Institute here and supported generously by Google, and we're so delighted to work with Google Ireland again on this event, as we have been in the past, and really value your cooperation and collaboration on this event, and indeed on similar other events that we've done previously. I know there's quite a lot of people joining online, and it's not surprising that more people than usual might opt to watch us from their garden than to come in. So you're all very welcome as well. We're really pleased to be joined by an expert panel, as you can see and as you'll hear, each of whom will make opening remarks for maybe 7 minutes or so, and then we'll go to a more general discussion and a Q&A. If you're attending in person, it's easy because you can indicate that you'd like to ask a question by simply putting up your hand in due course once the presentations are finished. And if you're online, you can use the by now very familiar Q&A function on Zoom, and you'll see that right there, and you can use it and send in your question. By the way, if your question occurs to you, if you're watching us online, you can punch that in at any stage, and we will come to that. The presentations and the Q&A are all on the record, so but there's no Chatham House restriction or anything like that. And we look forward to your questions and indeed comments, because sometimes we say, well, we're looking for questions, but if you have a comment or an observation or an input that you'd like to make, that's allowed as well. So as I said, we have a super panel. Vanessa Hartley is sitting right there beside me, head of Google Ireland and Vice President for Europe, the Middle East and Africa for large customer sales. Sheena Rhines, Director of Digital and Data Regulation at the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, CCPC. Marco Pierani is with us this afternoon. We're delighted that he has travelled to be here. The Director of Public Affairs and Media Relations for Euroconsumers. And Regina Doherty is a member of the European Parliament. So we will come to our panel in the order in which I have just listed them. And it's my pleasure to introduce firstly Vanessa Hartley, who, as I've said, is the head of Google Ireland and VP of Large Customer Sales for EMEA. She's been with Google for over 10 years, starting her Google career in 2014, managing the UK and Ireland retail teams. Vanessa then moved to lead in Germany and subsequently the Central Europe for Google's large customer sales business, and later the go-to market strategy team to run EMEA central operations. In 2022, Vanessa was appointed VP and leader of the EMEA LCS hub, and later appointed head of Google Ireland in April 2024. More than welcome. Over to you.
Great.
Thank you very much.
And listen, great to be here this afternoon and to talk about how we can continue to empower consumers and grow businesses here in Europe. So firstly, let me just start by just framing a little bit about the work that we do with businesses across in Google, and particularly here in Dublin. And we work every day with 1.7 million customers across 120 countries. And the needs of those businesses is changing like it has never changed before. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But I'm very proud to say that our operation here in Dublin is actually the largest business organization Google has in the world. And works with the most amount of customers, and as a consequence has a really unique vantage point of seeing what these businesses and consumers need. But let me just start firstly, I suppose, with competitiveness. So it's on everybody's mind. It is key to the agendas of not just global governments, but right down to the most, I suppose, the startup that started this morning, or the SME that we came into contact with on our way to this meeting, or to all of our friends and families, all of whom work in some part of business. And the reality is that the burden that is underway with these businesses is only intensifying. And we go back to the Draghi report 12 months ago, which outlined that obviously Europe was under a lot of competitiveness strain. And in fact, a huge part of that competitive strain and our gap to the level of growth that the US was seeing was based on the fact that we had missed the digitalization in the late 90s. And the fact that far too few technology businesses were actually built here in Europe as a consequence of kind of the lack, I suppose, of setup in that moment. And what I see every day is the challenge that these businesses have now to catch up globally and compete globally with the US and with China. But the reality also is that we have an extraordinary opportunity ahead of us, notwithstanding all of these challenges. And the opportunity exists is for us to think a lot about how, on the basis of this renewed focus within the EU, of what this simplification agenda might look like, and how we can ensure that we protect and empower consumers while also being extremely specific on the regulations that will continue to empower businesses. Again, we work every single day with startups across Europe, but particularly here in Ireland. And what they tell us is that the number one thing a business needs to start up or scale up or continue to grow across the world are clarity, certainty, access to capital, and then extraordinary tools. And on certainty, again, even since the Draghi report, that uncertainty is only intensified. And we see every single SME now really struggling to understand how they're going to make plans for the months ahead, how they're going to continue to go into 2026 stock acquisition versus what they've done previously. And so we think then a lot about personalised advertising. And again, as I say, our business here in Ireland is the largest site in the world for working on personalised advertising. And if you think about an SME that we would work with and the role that personalised advertising plays for them to be able to compete with large players. I'm going to take one of my favourite brands that has been with me for the last 10 years since my kids were getting bigger, EcoBaby. EcoBaby, an Irish startup business that actually builds clothes with sustainable friendly clothes. And again, competes with some of the biggest brands in the world to export globally. We see all of the different types of SMEs. We have an incredible SME. They've just won a big award with us, Lahinch Surf Shop. And again, they actually now export to more than 50 countries, their surfboards, all out of their small business in Lahinch in Clare. And if we think about what they don't need to think about, they don't need to think about competing with, if you're that surf shop in Clare, Billabong or all of the biggest brands in the world. They need to think about getting their products shipped and they need to think about generating capital for growing their business. Personalised advertising and the tools that we would work with every single day and work with them every single day are the things that allow them to compete and allow them to export. And again, export is a huge driver of all of this, and personalised advertising is critical. And so while we continue to welcome and believe that actually strong regulation is a competitive advantage for us here in the EU, what we've got to ensure that we do is that we don't continue to over-legislate. And we really do believe that the DFA is a litmus test for actually how we are going to drive our simplification agenda. There are clearly areas within the DFA that do need to be existing areas that do need to be regulated towards and for. But right now, for example, personalised advertising has more than 6 different legislations that cover it. And again, the individual business owner finds it extremely difficult to try and figure out how to work with them. And so in closing, what I would suggest is for us to think about not just at policymakers, even though we welcome all of the discussions with policy, but rather, all of our ecosystem together, our industry, business leaders, lots of them here with us today, thinking a lot about how we can make sure that Europe does not get left behind while continuing to protect consumers. And just a small anecdote that I will share is that Google, in this extraordinary AI era, as we think about it, there are 2 of our biggest products in the world that we cannot launch here in Europe because of legislation and because of regulation. And we need to, and that is just one company just talking about how AI isn't being made available because of the level of regulation challenges. We can't continue to not innovate, particularly with the pace of AI as it goes on in the world, because of this lack of certainty. So thank you so much again for facilitating the conversation, and looking forward to hearing your questions later.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Much to think about there, and we'll have an opportunity to come back on some of those points. Our second speaker is Sheena Ryan, who's Director of Digital and Data Regulation at the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. Previously headed up the Policy, Research and International Division at the CCPC. She's a member of the Legal Service Regulatory Authority and of the European Data Innovation Board. Sheena has extensive public policy experience operating across Irish, European and international institutions. She's been instrumental in the development of public policy and evolving legislation in Ireland, including in the areas of competition law, company law and intellectual property law. Sheena, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thanks to Google for organising this forum, for discussing what is very, very topical for us in the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, across government in Ireland, with our fellow regulators, and indeed with the companies that are in this space for regulation, and then most particularly how all of this impacts on our daily lives as consumers, as employees, as businesses who are growing and contributing to the economy. What we've seen from a consumer's perspective in Ireland is a huge amount of change. So the way people have been interacting, making decisions about purchase of products, how they renew their insurance, comparing goods online and in person, all of that has changed dramatically. Where business decisions or consumer-based decisions occur is a very different thing now, with a lot of people purchasing on their mobile phone with a lot more, maybe a condensed decision period, and also how information is being portrayed to consumers. So we have seen a vast change in that decision-making landscape. There have been quite a few changes in the regulatory environment, both here in Ireland and at EU level and internationally as well. And we would engage with consumers. We have contributed to policy development and also to the discussions that happen at EU and international level in order to best understand, but also to consider how to address these societal, business and individual issues that we're seeing. So if we think about how consumers interact, like we published a consumer detriment study here in Ireland in 2024, where the level of known detriment to consumers that they were able to self-report was practically €1 billion per annum. We looked at the different ways in which consumers were experiencing detriment. And when we look at things that are in the Digital Fairness Act, we see that the online versus the offline environment, how information is provided, how products are brought to you and services are brought to the attention of consumers, and what advertising looks like now in this era compared to what it would have been and what it was traditionally understood as. So these are all areas where, rightly, there should be renewed focus. I think one of the things that we're also very conscious of is decision-making and how decisions are being made, and also how decisions are being presented. I have 2 young boys in my house who are avid gamers. And we recently, the CCPC recently took part in a worldwide sweep to do with addictive behaviors online and purchasing in-app or in-game, and how that affects children. And it's quite startling. It's something that we continue to work on internationally, and this is an area that will be in focus, we hope, for the Digital Fairness Act. So these are areas where we can see that decision-making isn't happening in a more controlled environment. It's not about spending your pocket money and spending it all on sweets anymore. There's Robux and all these other types of in-app currencies. And it's very hard for them to make informed decisions. How much do 8 crystals cost, in a particular game? And what does that mean in actual money, in euros? Because it's all hidden behind knowledge and in-app experience. So these are areas, and we're talking about quite young children, and as well, how long they have to keep playing and what is involved there. So what we really need to think about are what are the challenges that need to be monitored, what prioritization looks like, and how do we protect. Now, that doesn't necessarily come at the cost of innovation. And this is something that we keep seeing cropping up, that it's nearly like a binary, whether you have regulation and enforcement versus the ability to grow and innovate. So I'd like to just touch on a new area of law that we are working on in the CCPC, which is around data regulation. So what we've seen is the Data Governance Act has come online, and we have responsibilities under that. And this is to allow trusted actors and to help businesses access data in a much more secure but also transparent manner, where a lot of the concerns that businesses would have in terms of data and GDPR compliance, and that where there are trusted, recognized actors who have been accredited in order to open up this data economy. So that's the Data Governance Act. We're also working with government on the Data Act, which is actually a very innovative piece of regulation. So this will bring to the fore the ability for user-generated content to belong to the user. So maybe to illustrate this by way of example, if you have a smartwatch and there is health-related data on your smartwatch, your blood pressure, your heart rate, how much you're sleeping at night, all of these things that we've seen on a day-to-day basis, that you can give that to your GP. So you can request that that data be transferred to your GP for health monitoring purposes. You could sign up to a service in order for your data to be collected and collated so that things can keep an eye, it's possible to keep an eye on things. And this is where ownership of data that is relevant to you and that you are generating reverts to you. So this is to open up the data economy. This is to provide access on FRAND terms, we call them, so they're fair terms for companies to access, for example, what we'd consider kind of big platforms, that they would be able to access that data, not necessarily to go into competition because it's not set up to do that. It's set up for ancillary products, ancillary services, so using that data for other means, but that will lead to innovation. So having that binary approach to enforcement or regulation versus innovation, I think it's a fallacy, and it depends on. Like, I absolutely take the point on the simplification agenda. It's something that we're working with government on at the moment to see what areas need renewed view. We're working across our fellow regulators with the Digital Regulators Group here in Ireland, and also with our international counterparts, learning from best experience internationally. So I suppose there is a whole ecosystem here that may not be visible to the general public, of people who are working to make markets work better, to ensure that the right checks and balances are in place, and to continue to evolve with the ever-changing world that we're seeing. There's so much more I could talk on, but I think I'll stop there for now, Alex.
Well, you've raised a lot there, and it's particularly this notion that you were touching on about, the binary, that it ought not to be a binary consideration as between the whole imperative of protection and so on, and regulation, and then innovation, the possibility for innovation on the other side, that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive at all. And that's, I suppose, the area that we really want to get at, to see, is there a way, not so much a middle course, but is there a way of having both at the center of public policy. Marco Pierani is I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, reasonably correctly, is Director of Public Affairs and Media Relations for Euroconsumers. He's over 20 years of experience championing consumer trust and innovation, first at Altro Consumo, Italy's most representative consumer organization, as head of its external relations, and since 2016 at Euroconsumers, the world's leading consumer group in innovative information, personalized services, and consumer rights advocacy. Euroconsumers gathers 5 national consumer organizations, giving voice to over 1.5 million people across Italy, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, and Brazil. Marco is a law graduate, sorry about that, from the University of Bologna, and has an LLM in European Business Law from the University of Nijmegen. I think that's correct. Over to you, Marco.
Thank you very much, and thanks for this invite. I'm very happy to be here on this very timely debate today. Life as consumer organization representative is never boring. Yesterday I was busy on working with a football supporter organization to write a letter to FIFA for the championship. So today I'm here with this other audience, I believe lawyers, economists, or policy expert. And but don't worry, the megaphone, I left it at the door. I metaphorically would have brought a hat as a cup of ultra to bring a bit of energy on the digital fairness debate, which I believe is needed. But I was saying before, lawyers. So, and you also made a remark. Myself being, how many lawyers are on the here? Not so many, which is good, and I say with love, because I used to be one, and as you know that there is a say, once lawyer, you remain always lawyer. But the bad thing, so the thing that is challenging is that lawyers arrives always late at the tech party. And this is becoming, with the speed of innovation, this is becoming more and more the reality. So by the time we regulate Instagram stories, teenagers are on Be Real, and maybe AI is writing a novel out of that. So we need to be aware. This is we will not change, and it's becoming it is becoming more a challenge. Still, we must try, and it's not only for lawyers, it's for the legislator in general, to tackle these issues, because digital transformation is reshaping consumer life. Access, speed, personalization, yes, but on the other hand, also manipulation and opacity, very often opacity. At Euroconsumer, we are not afraid of digital. We see it as a big opportunity. But opportunity needs trust. And this trust should be mainly between consumer and businesses, and of course with the authorities that should guarantee a level playing field. Only with trust we can make the digital market deliver for all. And of course, innovation is there when make the life of the most of the, I don't want to even say consumers, of the people better. So that's the real innovation. We need to make possible that innovation deliver. And this is not a challenge only for engineers or lawyers, is a challenge for our society and for the governance of our society and our institution. So I want to make 3 points today. One is rules without results don't protect. This is the first point. Second point, online demands a different lens. Third point, we need a smart, layered way forward. So on the first point, Europe is not short on rules. We know that, sorry, I mean, that's an objective analysis. So DSA, and I stay on the consumer field. DSA on Omnibus Directive, UCPD, the Consumer Act Directive. We are going to have all other that we are working on. If laws alone protected consumer, we'd live in a sort of paradise. But rules without enforcement, that's just a sort of poetry. Beautiful, aspirational, often ignored. There were only few lawyers. There are poets in the room. But okay, that's the reality. Enforcement, it's important. Take, for example, the fake reviews issue, so that I go on some topics. Our Spanish member organization, OCU, has analyzed this issue on 6 million reviews through also technology, which is also helpful to analyze these things. And up to 8.5% of those, they were fake, okay? We reported to the authority, we filed, silence. Altro Consumo in Italy went further. We analyzed 9 websites, 8 Telegram channels, 7 Facebook groups. We even won a case in court of all this. But then when the case was won, the website was already closed for a while. So that's enforcement is essential. But blaming authorities or the fact that authorities are not speeding up to come with result is not enough. Under DSA and under Omnibus, platforms now have the legal duties. They must detect, they must act, okay? So we need to remember about that. If we, with our modest means, could track fake reviews, then certainly they can do as well. And we could do it better together by the way we have done together. And technology can help pretty much. And this will bring trust. Trust is common, is a common battle. It's not for consumers or business. Trust is a common battle if we want this digital market to be there in the next future and to deliver for all. On the second point, let's not pretend online and offline are the same. Digital is faster, immersive, persuasive, but is also opaque. Sorry for I hope my Italian English is understood here. We do support, as I say before, digital market, but dark patterns, algorithmic persuasion, manipulative interfaces are different. That's not commerce. It risks to be influence engineering. So I was speaking about our working with the supporters in the letter of FIFA towards FIFA. It was about a dynamic price. We are not against the market. We are in favor of the market. We are in favor of also of the revenues that you can make in the market. And we are not by principle against dynamic pricing. But when dynamic pricing is implemented in a oligopolistic market, this can be problematic. That's the case of the World Football Championship. And because basing price on fans' desperation, because for a fan to have to go there, it's really is a sort of emotional extortion. And jumping on another subject, the same is for consent. Clicking I agree after 20 seconds of legal jargon is not informed consent. It is a sort of legal fiction. So under this fiction, there is a reality, which is personal data. Personal data, and you touched the point before, personal data is not only so privacy is not only a fundamental right. Privacy is also the economic value of the data. And this data, for the largest part, is generated by us as consumers. So in very many years ago, it seems like a century, but it was only 2017, we published a declaration that is named My Data is Mine. You can still go there. It's not a protective approach. It's just to say the data is generated by consumers. And consumers should have something in return for that, because we are feeding the development of this market. I go to the last point. The digital fitness check of the European Commission was quite clear and a deep analysis. It mapped the problem and found loopholes. Which are the conclusion? Current consumer law only partly deliver in the digital space. So yes, maybe we need new regulation, but regulation should not be for the sake of regulation itself. New laws must fill gaps, clarify gray zones, and reflects today's realities. We cannot think, we should try to think not even on the issue today, but we should be smart enough of imagining what is happening tomorrow, because legislation always it's risking to arrive very late. So at Euroconsumer, we believe in the mix of three things. Enforcement when it works. Regulation where really needed. Collaboration where goals align. We must more and more become bridge builders and enablers. I will finish very quickly. But I want to mention also this part of collaboration because it's key. We worked with Meta on scam awareness, digital scam awareness. We worked with Amazon on fake reviews. We are working for a long time with Google on the consumer empowerment project, if you find it on the web. When the goal is shared, we really need to join forces. But let's not pretend that consumer information alone will save us. It's not only information, because this is a mantra. It's not only with consumer information you can solve problems. We need compliance by design, protection by architecture, and we need accountability by algorithm. So that's how we can make digital markets work for everyone. From our side, so before I say we need to watch in the future, 10 years ago, we were, and I believe you were involved as well, we were discussing on regulating door-to-door sales, okay? It's not 100 years ago, okay? No, it's 10 years ago. So today is about TikTok commerce, AI influencers, subscription traps, okay? So technology is fast, law is low, but our values can keep up if we evolve them, of course. At Euroconsumer, we see digital, again, I want to repeat, not as a threat, but a force that we need to shape together. For our side, we are here to protect, empower, and represent consumers. Not just as users, passive users, or voters, but as market participants, positive participants. Because what is at stake is not the trust on platform, it's the trust on the market as a whole. Thank you very much, and sorry if I had many things to say.
Yeah, that's okay. That's all right. No, that's why we invited you, and thank you very much. Our final speaker, last but by no means least, is Regina Doherty, member of the European Parliament for Dublin City and County. And we're delighted to have Regina Doherty here this afternoon. As I said earlier, we're delighted to have all our panelists here, including those who've travelled, but particularly happy that Regina has been able to find time to be with us after a very busy week in the Parliament and travelling around and going from here to there. So it's just wonderful that you were able to come. Regina was first elected to the European Parliament in June of last year, 2024. She serves on the Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee and the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee, both very powerful and important committees in the Parliament. Also on the Employment and Social Affairs Committee, the Housing Committee, and the Committee on Tax Matters. So busy. Regina Doherty serves as Vice Chair of both the Housing and Tax Committees. She's also a member of the Parliament's Delegation for Relations with the countries of South Asia and the Delegation for Relations with the countries of Southeast Asia and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. For goodness sake. I don't know when you get time to be in Dublin, but thanks again. Regina brings over 15 years of political experience to her role, having served at Cabinet, firstly as Chief Whip and then as Minister for Employment Affairs and Social Protection. So Regina, thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for coming and for joining, and for the IIEA to actually give us a space to tease out some of the things that sometimes you get bogged down with when you're in having political discussions. So I just want to say three things, and I'll be brief. We have and the European Parliament loves their acronyms. So everything is called an ABC, a 1, 2, 3, a DSA, like they love them. And if you don't know what you're talking about, you could get totally lost and go down rabbit holes. But we do have an awful lot of legislation that governs particular environments, and we're talking about the digital space today, in order to keep people safe and to make the practices of selling online fair so that there is healthy competition. And we have enormous pieces of legislation that have sought to do exactly those things, but they haven't quite done them yet. And I think it's probably, number one, because the pace at which societal change is happening is enormous, and the pace at which we pass legislation is very slow. And I wish that we could look into even a year in the future and decide what's going to happen and regulate for that. But actually, it is happening, and the pace of change is happening so fast, I'm not sure that that's possible. But that means then that we have to change, and I'm not sure we're actually in that space yet, but at least we're talking about it. The reason we're here today is to talk about another piece of legislation that's coming called the DFA, again, to try and maybe curb some of the loopholes that we've seen created between the DMA and the DSA and the AI Act and a whole load of others. But it's to do so in a manner that we've learned from the over-regulation of the other acts, and to make sure that we do this with such simplicity that it actually gives us the goal of what we're trying to do, which is to create a fair, safe space in a digital environment for consumers to be able to enjoy that trusting relationship and to be able to do their business that we now actually take so much for granted, and it isn't door-to-door sales as it was only a few years ago, but also to kind of be aware that, again, that might change in another 12 months or 24 months to be something entirely different. We only had a conversation about influencers earlier on. So the world is changing, and the laws which we craft have to be modern and flexible enough to make sure that we do protect people in what is now just generally accepted practices in their world, but actually also to make sure that the businesses that provide all of those services in that world can remain competitive, right? And that's the purpose of the conversation today. That's the first thing. The second thing I will say is that because some of the unintended consequences that have arisen over the last number of years because of loopholes in DMA, DSA, GDPR, PS, or a whole lot of legislation, because the legislative isn't swift enough to actually react to close those loopholes, I would love to see more cooperation between the stakeholders. And to that end, a number of us, countries, organisations, parliamentarians have looked and sought for a multi-stakeholder task force to be established, which I'm pleased to say will be established come August, September of this year. And very hopefully it will be chaired by the Commission as opposed to any particular organisation, to make sure that we can cooperate and collaborate with the loopholes and take action, you know, on a voluntary basis until the legislation can catch up. And one of those areas, just to briefly explain what I'm talking about, is that we have enormous financial fraud that happens online. It happens with telcos, it happens on your phone when you get text messages. The DPD man is coming and you owe him €9.50. Like, it happens in so many ways, shapes and forms. And all of the legislation that we have is there to protect you after the fact. But if we had a mechanism to prevent it happening in the first place, to protect consumers, wouldn't you think that we'd take it? And right now in the Parliament, we have different pieces of legislation that is competing with each other to stop us from asking platforms to make sure that when they take an advertisement from somebody selling their wares, whether it's a financial services product or a pair of 200 quid runners, to make sure that the company is actually authentic and that it has a license to operate. And particularly in the financial area, people have had their life savings whipped out of their bank accounts without them even realising it. And when you go to report the ad thereafter, sure, the ad is gone, the company is gone, sure, it didn't exist. And the only company that we know of, that I know of at the moment, and it really hats off to them, is Google, that have actually voluntarily taken the step to try and preempt that fraud in the first place. But to my mind, as a politician and a policymaker, we should be telling and making sure that every single platform assures that what they're selling or who they're selling with is a trusted partner. And we need to make sure of that. Our legislation is getting in the way of that, and it's really driving me insane. But we need new legislation to fix those loopholes, but we need it to be fair, because we've seen in the last number of years the legislation that we have enacted, probably with good intentions to protect people and to protect fair environments, has had unintended consequences. That is stopping businesses from actually innovating in Europe. That's stopping international businesses that we wouldn't be in the halfpenny place without in this country, particularly for investment and our jobs that we're so blessed to have. Those companies are not able to launch innovations in the European Union because of legislation that we've passed. So again, the mindset of the European Union is to try and make sure that we get more European innovation, But you don't do that by keeping people out of competition. How you compete or how you be competitive is to actually compete in the first place. So we need to have a proper, fair, simple enough that actually people can grow and innovation can happen environment of a legislation that does all of the things that we want to do, which is to protect consumers, grow innovation, protect businesses and allow it to grow. But we need to do that so much faster, so much more cooperatively and collaboratively. And again, the very final point that I wanted to make is that the things that we know that are wrong, that are so, so harmful, and obviously financial fraud is one of them, but the protection of our vulnerable citizens, and in the main, a lot of them are our children, from incredibly dark practices, and they don't come from social media platforms or organizations that are, tech innovative. They come from human endeavors, and we need to protect our vulnerable people in society by making sure, as you had said, the enforcement that we actually have, first of all, is enacted, and that when we find something that's wrong, we can make all the rules on this end that we like, but when we find people that are breaking those rules, we need to come down really, really heavy and hard to make sure that we protect the most vulnerable people in society. And whether they're our young children, from a very, very murky world, or whether they're consumers, to make sure that they get the right treatment, whether it's through, those selling exchanges, prices that fluctuate up and down, whatever it happens to be, it needs to be simple, it needs to be enforceable, and it really needs to be timely. And I think that's where we're falling down in the Parliament. We're still doing things in cycles of 3 and 5 years, and sure, AI will have changed in 2 weeks the way companies do business, and we're still only thinking about it, so we have a lot to learn.
The complexity is enormous, though, isn't it? I mean, Marco's point earlier, the lawyers get late to it's the law that gets late, actually. I mean, we can personalize it to say it's the lawyers, but the legislation very often comes late. And part of that is the sheer challenge of understanding what's happening in the particular market, and particular, understanding what the implications would be of certain items of legislation that it's sought to bring forward. But Vanessa made the point earlier quite starkly, and you just touched on it there, Regina, perhaps not replying expressly to what Vanessa said, but she said, and I think it was striking, that there were 2 products that Google could launch in Europe, or would like to launch in Europe, if I'm not paraphrasing it slightly, that simply can't be done. Because, again, I don't want to misrepresent what you said, but as I understood it, because of the regulatory environment that's there. And Marco, would you accept that that is likely the case? In other words, that there are products and innovations that and proposals, as it were, that can't be launched in Europe, and that might be of value.
I don't know which are exactly the products, but yeah. I believe it's not acceptable. It's not, first of all, you cannot, and we are in, you cannot block the water. You cannot block the internet or whatever is the products or services. So it would be even not effective to block innovation. Innovation is there and will arrive. We need to always find a way to protect consumers, especially vulnerable consumers. Minors, it's an issue. Minors is an issue today, okay? And I know Google is working on it, also other players. But blocking innovation is not the way through. Also because in Europe, we have a competitiveness issue. And we cannot be taken out of innovation that will be deployed in other part of the world.
But do you accept that this is happening? There are products that are not coming through because of the regulatory environment, as Vanessa has said. Sorry, no, I'm not saying it's your fault. Vanessa, you'd like to elaborate on that.
Yeah. I just think, and I do want to say that those particular products are not for minors. They are very, very specifically for general business usage. I think the point is that in many instances, actually, we've had extremely constructive discussion pre-early launch, in advance of launching with regulators. Helen Dixon's here in the room. And we would actually really ask in advance of launches for input, advices. How can we actually make sure that this is fitting the needs of what is needed? And I think I really welcome that idea that Regina has in regards to how can we get a multidisciplinary task force together where actually we can bring together this idea of consumer empowerment and innovation and have a discussion in advance of launches of these types of products so that we can make sure that we can legislate for them rather than having this impact kind of analysis that feels like we're kind of constantly, everyone's scrambling. And I think this goes to the point where nothing in the world is binary. Everything lives in the middle. It is not, to your point earlier, it is not about empowerment versus competition, but rather how can you collaborate and work together to make sure that you can have all of these extraordinary values that are intrinsic to who we are as Europeans, and make sure that we protect innovation.
Sheena, on that point.
Yeah, specifically on that point, I think it's very interesting because this isn't the first time I've had a conversation around products or services that don't meet the requirements currently under law to be launched in Europe. And it's always seen as, isn't this terrible? And the flip side of that question is, what is it about that product? What is it about that service that doesn't meet our legal requirements to go on the market? And that's a really important question. Like, the CCPC is also a market surveillance authority. We conduct searches, checks for product safety. We are taking products off the market that cause death, that cause harm, and these should not be on the market. Okay, so it isn't just down to what we can and can't do. Innovation has also led to greater targeting of minors, greater sales techniques. Innovation has led to dark practices. So not all innovation is there to serve the values that we have as citizens and the European values that we espouse through the treaties of what we want our European Union to look like. Now, it's not all rosy either. Again, there is a middle point here, but I think it is very important not to decry those things that are not currently legal and to consider what are those reasons.
Not all innovation is good. Not all regulation is bad. I suppose the 2 points. There's a question in actually for you, Sheena. I'll put it in, but just Paul O'Brien, Head of Public Affairs at Bank of Ireland Group. And by the way, I invite anybody to indicate here who'd like to come in, just indicate and I'll come to you. And online, similarly, Paul O'Brien, Head of Public Affairs at Bank of Ireland Group. It's a comment rather than a question, but you can comment on his comment if you like. I would like to thank Regina for her comments on preventing fraud before it happens online. Also to thank Google for their changes to protect Irish consumers. In our view, the Digital Services Act does not strike the right balance for consumer protection, and there should be additional legislative protections to prevent fraud before it happens. And kind of linked to that comment, Connor Spain of Hanover Communications has a question for Sheena. I don't know if you know the up-to-date answer on this. Could you give an overview to the extent that it's possible as to where the DFA, albeit it's not published, sits within the legislative process domestically, which department is likely to take the lead and so on? Just where is it? That's by your reaction, that seems to be a curved question, but I didn't spot that when I read it.
I'm wondering why the question is being asked.
Yes,
Connor.
yeah. Well, anyway,
I'm aware
the best
that
you can. Yeah.
it is under Commissioner McGrath's remit. We met with his cabinet, with the CCPC, as part of the process that we have of feeding into the development of the legislation.
Yeah.
We don't have a text to the Digital Fairness Act yet. I understand that'll be mid-2026. I'm aware that there are conversations taking place in government departments, but I cannot speak for them here today.
Of course not. Yeah.
I think that is a matter for government and not for a government agency to comment on.
Fair enough.
In terms of the fraud piece, I think it is very interesting. So I think something also has to be said in relation to the suite of digital legislation that has come in recently. It is recent. We are still working our way through it. So the CCPC has a role under the Digital Services Act in relation to online marketplaces. We are serving on working groups and working with Commissioner Mann, who are the data services coordinator here in Ireland. Financial scams and fraud is one of those areas that we're currently looking into and targeting. So part of this is, I think there is impatience for these structures to be stood up, for the agencies to be fully empowered, fully underway. And we're still, it's fair to say, in the implementation growth phase in relation to where we are at in the CCPC. I understand that Commissioner Mann is continuing to grow in its numbers in order to fulfill its role under the Digital Services Act and other digital legislation. So I think there is an element of this has all yet to hang together fully. And while the pace of change is massive, we still have to build the systems and structures in place to deal with it.
Sure. Question in front. Yeah.
Don't know if this is required, but Suzanne
But also for people watching online, so they can.
Sure. So CEO of IB Ireland. So I guess you had also welcomed comments, and I just wanted to say, you know, it is really heartening to hear all the perspectives and indeed the great deal of alignment and yet differentiation in terms of recognising the role of regulators. I think it's crucial that industry, as our body is an industry body, but we don't just represent publishers, platforms, the media agencies. We also represent advertisers, and not just the large advertisers, but small advertisers. And I know that Vanessa has mentioned these. These would be a big concern for us in terms of the competitiveness of Ireland, but I know also in terms of Europe. Also to speak to the points Regina mentioned in relation to scam ads, and also Sheena mentioned as well, just to let you know, because you may not know yet, but I'm also on the board of the Advertising Standards Authority and the good work that it's doing, working with CCPC in relation to influencers. But we will also be introducing a scam ads alert. And that's going to be part of our gold standard, the IAB gold standard. Google is part of that, as our members will be. And it has been working effectively in the UK. Now, it's incredibly challenging area. So essentially what this means is consumers can provide those alerts and that they can be promptly taken down across the industry. Of course, it's whack-a-mole, and so much of this is global scams, but I think it points to the industry's commitment to doing, scam ads are disastrous for our industry, gives our members a dreadful environment to operate in. And the truth is that advertisers in Ireland are generally not involved in these areas. So just to say that separately, in relation to financial advertising, we also have introduced a criteria for our gold standard, whereby financial advertising would not be accepted by our members unless the company is actually registered with the financial the central bank, central bank in Ireland. So again, that's not going to stop all the financial scams, but it's to say these practices are really important. And also in our outreach at Europe and indeed in Ireland, industry wants to be a good partner with regulators, and we really recognise the challenge. My law background is a law degree. I didn't practice, but it is fast changing, and to sit in your shoes as regulators, it is an incredibly difficult task. And I think the only way we can do a better job, which we need to do in Ireland and in Europe, is by having these conversations, respecting each other's duties, but actually collaborating and ensuring that the regulation is fit for purpose, not just for now and the future.
Sure. Gentleman behind.
Hi, my name is Liam Roach, a member of the Institute here. I think this is the fourth session I've been at here on the tech subject generally, and particularly the DSA and now the DFA. And there are numerous other ones as well. So I think I'm now fairly well informed about regulation, well informed enough to know that a year on from Draghi and Letty, this is where the conversation in Europe is. Nothing to say about the Institute. The Institute has been very good in analysing these subjects. But in 5 years' time, Europe will still be regulating mainly American tech platforms with a few Chinese ones. There'll be no European ones because we've totally left out the innovation and the capital needs of startup businesses in Europe. And it's just not happening. All the conversation is regulation, regulation, regulation.
And Vanessa, just picking up on that, I mean, you made the point earlier about the SMEs and that rely on digital advertising or want to do so, want to see that being available more and more. I mean, from your perspective, is that where this is at, in the sense that there's a service or there's a facility and there's an opportunity there that SMEs want, and there's a concern that it's being constrained?
Yeah, look, I think we've also got to balance the conversation, where I do believe that building privacy safe advertising platforms and ensuring that we protect the civil liberties to continue to build trust online is actually how we will continue to have a sustainable online world that actually is safe for everybody and actually continues to grow businesses. So again, you know, lots of I would speak a lot to people every single day, in fact, in California. And what I would say to them is, actually, this is the place where we can really think about how to build that platform. And again, that can be a competitive advantage towards other regions. And how can we continue to work together and collaborate? And I suppose the challenge really is how do we make sure that the narrative is a balanced narrative, and it is a narrative that is focused on how we can continue to innovate, how we can continue to have skills built in STEM, right? I'm obsessive about the amount of STEM graduates we have here in Ireland, and that we could, you know, honestly, I could hire 3 times as many here in Ireland every single day. So I think the point is we need to continue to build a pro-business, pro-innovation while respecting our values. And that actually could be Europe and the EU's actual sustainable differentiation as the world continues to develop online. But again, that therein lies, I suppose, the challenge, where we need to find a common lexicon across the lawyers and the engineers and the business people and the business leaders in the industry and the parliamentarians, that we can actually work towards that together, because it feels right now like it is extremely unnuanced and very binary. And, you know, you can't so I think it's certainly like an SME is not thinking about any legislation in Brussels. They really aren't. They can't honestly figure out that versus US tariffs, right? So again, there is a challenge about trying to figure out how we can make sure that we simplify how we help businesses while doing it in a safe way.
Yeah, Seamus. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much to the panel for their comments. I'm Seamus Allen, researcher here at the IIA. So I just want to ask that the panel, you all mentioned the huge amount of regulations that are there in place already. And so I guess my first question is, to what degree do we need these new regulations like the Digital Fairness Act to close gaps, close loopholes? And to what degree do the panel think that there could be possible overlap or possible duplications or potentially problematic interactions? And I guess my second question is closely related to that. And it's just, and Regina mentioned this, what have we learned from doing so much regulation in terms of doing it better, in terms of loopholes, in terms of how burdensome it is, but also in terms of some of the principles of making regulations technology neutral and future proof? So I think Marco mentioned, it was very interesting, that the offline world and the online world are different. Does that mean they should be regulated differently? Should we not be doing technology neutrality? And Regina mentioned how fast the technology changes. Should we be trying to make regulation future-proof, or should we just accept that's not possible and we are going to have to change the law every couple of years? Just your thoughts on that. I'd be really interested.
Regina?
I think when you pass legislation or you draft and sit down to compose it, you try and look into the future. And a lot of the times we are successful in that. But I think the digital world is changing so fast that it's hard to actually even imagine scenarios next year, 5 years. I mean, there's products available today that nobody had even thought about 5 years ago, you know, and they're already part and parcel of our daily lives. So we do try. But I think it's not to try and build into legislation for the next 10 years. I mean, at the moment, we're going through the PSR, which is the Payments and Services Regulation. We're doing this review for the first time in 10 years for the next 10 years. We won't recognize payments in 10 years' time, because today's payments world is vastly different to what it was. It's nearly as the door-to-door salesman versus online sales today. So what we need to do is to change our practice, is to say that the 3-5 year cycle of legislation is too far out for some products. For other products, it's probably actually fine. For other areas of life, like criminality or education, it may be fine. But it's not fine in the digital world because it's changing so fast. So that means that we need to change. Now, we are changing. Draga and Letty, the letter report, have given everybody a wake-up call. I can't believe that they didn't know it beforehand, but now apparently we all know. And it does mean that simplification is the mode of thinking. But what I don't want us to do is to do all of the omnibus bills, which will simplify the 10 years of legislation that we've done for the last 10 years, and then just go back to normal and start again. You know, this needs to be the new mantra. And Liam, just to reassure you, we do totally recognise that we ourselves and the decisions that the European Union has made in the last year or years is responsible for the lack of European innovation. It's not America's fault, or it's not China's fault. It's our fault. And the Savings and Investment Union, hopefully, with our new Commissioner Albuquerque, will make sure that that 800 billion euros that we need to give our businesses the opportunity to scale up here in Europe is provided very, very soon. Because if it isn't, we all need to have the legs cut off us. So we know what the problems are. You know, we know how to fix them. Timescales are a problem. And that's why I think working cooperatively together until the legislation catches up is an absolute must.
Marco.
It's very difficult to answer in a specific way. I think we need to work on changing the approach to regulate. So, for example, regulatory sandbox, we need to use it more and more. We need to try to focus on not blanket, but going in specific. Simplification is there, is in the agenda. I want to say also more to the question before, there are also, we should be also positive when something happens. Speaking about Letta and Draghi report, there is a consultation out there of McGrath on the 28 regime there. So this is for innovation, for startup. This will help that maybe in the next future we will have also the possibility of startup in Europe to innovate and even grow, because the point is not only legislation, it's also the financial market that does not allow this. And maybe you find strange that as a consumer organization representative, I mentioned this thing. But we need not only protection, we need empowerment. If the market is not there anymore, the European market is a great asset. We need to make it work and to innovate and to allow business to grow. We have spoken a lot of regulation, but we have also financial market limits here in Europe to make possible that good innovation, and when I say good innovation, is those innovation that allow people to have a better life. And there are many ideas around with startup in Europe. I know it in Belgium, in Italy, in Spain and Portugal, wherever we operate. The point is they are not by design of our financial framework, able to scale up. This in other parts of the world happen, here not yet. So the 28 regime is a good news. And the consultation is out, so let's try to make it happen.
Sheena?
It's a very big question, Seamus. There are many questions altogether, so I might just touch on some topics that haven't been addressed.
Yeah.
I think with some of the new regulation that we've seen alternative ways where there's more interaction from third parties. So if you take, for example, the DSA has a mechanism for trusted flaggers for takedown of content from website, where you can gain trusted flagger status, and that is then actioned by the platforms. We also have seen, we mentioned the social media influencers guidelines that we published in association with the Advertising Standards Authority. We've seen consumers who are calling out influencers for not abiding, for not declaring advertising or not declaring when something has been gifted to them. So you're actually seeing a much more interactive experience from consumers in order to achieve compliance. And these are all welcome. Like for the online and offline environment, the tools that we have as a regulator have expanded. We are able to conduct a lot more with web scraping tools and compliance checks and that in the online environment than it takes to put a team of 20 authorised officers into a town in Ireland to go check whether the mobile phone chargers, for example, are compliant with the CE mark for product safety. You know, so we have different tools at our disposal. Some of the things are a little bit asymmetrical at national level and at European level. So Europe is not the answer to everything. We have better powers, for example, in relation to consumer protection fines under EU law than we have for prosecutions that we take here in Ireland. So this is something as part of the programme for government. We're working with our government department on it so that when we take a prosecution, it doesn't end up with a €1,000 donation to the poor box or to penny dinners, which is not dissuasive. And it comes down to, if you are going to have to go after bad actors, what is the dissuasive effect of the powers that you have? Sure. Now, the Digital Fairness Act, I think, looks at this through a different lens, where we all have certain powers spread out throughout Europe to do with things like, you know, advertising, social media influencers, loot boxes and gaming, some of the topics that we've talked about today. And maybe there a European solution is the best outcome.
Sure. We're up on 2 o'clock. I have one brief question, if that's okay. Anybody else, though? We could take another brief one if anybody else would like to make a comment or a question. You're welcome. Okay, one last one. I'll give Vanessa then an opportunity as well.
My name is Keane Fitzgerald. I'm a senior researcher here at the IA. My question is a little more specific towards consumer protection, which is, I wonder, is there a better way that we could regulate practices around dropshipping products? It's very often that, where not at all dropshippers, but many often are engaged in misleading practices around the origins of their product. I can say personally, where you believe you're buying something from a European supplier and it turns out that your product is actually being shipped from China. And it's often very difficult when those products are faulty or they're not what they're described, that you're not able to access your consumer protection rights. So I wonder, is there a better way to either regulate that for either disclosing that you're engaging in those practices, or also for the advertising standards around, especially around influencers, many of those also try to engage in those practices as well. So.
Okay, Marco, maybe briefly on that one, as we are over time.
Briefly, I believe it's not pretty much on regulation, but on enforcement here. And unfortunately, we have a system of enforcement that is strong, and I believe also integrated in the public enforcement, but deliberately we decided not to have a strong system of private enforcement in Europe, because if you see also the legislation that is now going implemented, the directive on class action is not even named class action, because we decided to call representative action, which is a mistake that we made some years ago, because this private enforcement can also protect to unfair competition coming from outside. And if we don't have strong private enforcement instrument that could dynamically work with public enforcement, then we will have their infringement that will not be tackled in a timely manner.
Okay, thank you very much. We are over time. I'm going to give Vanessa the last word, unless Regina or Sheena would like to add anything to that. No, Vanessa, and thank you again.
Okay, well, I mean, I think actually...
Not necessarily on that question, just as an overall.
I won't have any answer to that question in particular, but no, I just want to say a huge thank you. I think it was a very engaging discussion. And I think important to say more in common than not. And I think as we look towards, I'm very excited by the fact that we're going to have our EU presidency here in Ireland next year. It gives us an extraordinary opportunity in an incredible moment of change, where we can really think about what are the common areas that make us find us as Europeans, and how can we ensure that we are speaking with one voice in those, and how can we ensure that we are increasing the competitiveness of our region to make sure that we stay as relevant and as vibrant and as than we have over the last millennia. And again, I just thank everybody for their points of view. I think very brilliantly expressed, and we're here as Google as part of want to continue to work together, partner and support everybody. So thank you.
I'm reminded by colleagues that in fact we scheduled it to 2:15, so I feel a little bit like the teacher saying that we're to let everybody out early rather than late because of the beautiful weather that's there. So thank you all very much, in particular the panel, also those of you who came here in person and those of you who've been engaging online. I think it's been a really stimulating discussion. Thanks to Google. Thanks to everybody for being here. Have a beautiful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.